Welcome to the I Made a podcast where we hear from podcasters about the wisdom that they learned since starting their own podcast so you can do the same. And now here's your host, Chris Curry.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of I Made a Podcast. I'm grateful that you're here. This is going to be another wonderful episode. I had so much fun in this conversation. Today I spoke to Meisha Watson, and she has an amazing podcast, and her experience that she had in the media industry was very, very, very valuable. It's very valuable to all podcasters out there. She drops so much wisdom and insight about podcasting, about social media, how to use it to build a platform. She dropped so much wisdom on us today, so much things that I learned from this conversation that I had with Meisha. So I want to go get Meisha right now. But before I do, I want to remind you of my podcasting cheat sheet. It's a list of resources that you need for your podcast, whether it is hardware and software. It's all on this cheat sheet. And I call it a cheat sheet because a lot of these resources are free. Yes, you don't have to pay a dime for some of them. And you can use them, get the benefit without even spending any money. So go get the cheat sheet, start your podcast, start to get traction and a great sounding podcast, and you don't have to spend $1. So cheat sheet, the link for that is in the description. You can go on there and get it, and you can have a great sounding podcast. Now, let me go get Meisha. This was an amazing conversation, so stay tuned. You're going to learn a lot. You're going to get a lot, so make sure that you write down notes as she's talking, or listen to this again if you're driving right now, or if you're doing something that requires your direct attention. You can listen to it when you get home later, and you can take notes because she drops so much knowledge and information on us for all podcasters. I learned a lot from this conversation. So let me go get Meisha, and I'll be back at the end of this episode to wrap things up. Now, today I'm speaking with Meisha Watson. Meisha, how are you doing today?
So good, Chris. Thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this interview. Excited to get started.
So yeah, this is going to be a great conversation with you. I know you have a lot of insights to share, and I know all of the people out there are going to love some of the wonderful things that you're going to bring to the podcast today. So can you maybe introduce yourself? Let us know the name of your podcast, a little bit about yourself, your background, whatever it is that you want to share that can help people get a better picture of who Meisha is.
Oh, yes. Well, my name is Meisha Watson. I have been working in Christian media for about 5 years. I've been working in entertainment for about 13 or 12 years in television primarily. And I started my podcast, My Single Story, just under 2 years ago, I would say, almost 2 years actually. And it was a long process from pitching the show and making sure people knew how important it was to create something for Christian singles. And to today, where it is my podcast produced from start to finish by me. And it's kind of my little love, my true love.
Wonderful. Nice. So can you tell me now, so what was the decision process like when you said, hey, I want to start a podcast? And you said something earlier just about pitching it.
Yeah.
Can you go into, if you want to go into a little bit more details about why you decided to start a podcast and this pitch process? Because I'm hearing that there was like more people involved in this decision.
Definitely. So I worked for a big organization for a long time, and we make tons of different kinds of content for Christians, for people who are curious about the faith. And just after the pandemic, just before it, I had a breakup. And it was a really hard time to go through during a really isolated time for everyone in the world. And for myself, because my faith is so important to me, I realized that I needed help. I needed to talk to people who could understand what I was experiencing. And I couldn't really find any singles content that didn't make me feel pitiful or super cringy or oversimplifying what it means to be a single in this day and age. And so I was like, I think I need to create it myself. So I started writing ideas. Was I going to do a stage play? Was I going to do a TV show? I'm used to doing TV shows. I was like, is that going to be the thing? But it felt like it needed to be a bit more intimate. And I used to do a 3-hour commute every day. So it's like, I love playing podcasts or sermons or whatever on my way to work. I'm like, what if it's that? And so I brought it to my boss just middle of the pandemic. And I said, this is what I want to do. And she was like, this is amazing. And it took about a year for us to make it through kind of like the approval process and all that sort of stuff. So it was a lot of like developing what the podcast would be, who it would be for, who it's not for, how we would shoot it. I'd never done a podcast before, all this kind of stuff. And and basically it got greenlit after just under a year. And then we kicked off on Valentine's Day a year and a half ago.
Wonderful. Yeah. So it sounds like lots of people were involved in the production of this podcast, or at least a handful of people.
Yeah, so I'm kind of blessed in that way. A lot of people kick off their podcast being the solo producer, writer, right? Like, guest wrangler, all that sort of stuff. But from day one, I've had an associate producer and I've
Wow.
had an editor as well. And within the team, we have someone who works on graphic design. So it's a team of four of us that were able to kick it off from day one. None of us had done a podcast before, but we've done TV shows.
Hmm.
So that was kind of the biggest blessing, was that it just wasn't me
Hmm.
out the gate.
Wow, wonderful. And like you said, that is a blessing because so much other podcasters out there right now, it's a one-man show basically, or a one-woman
Yeah.
show, right? They're doing
Yeah.
everything. A lot of people that I've spoken to on this podcast, they're the talent coordinator. They have to find guests. They're the audio technician. They have to set up
Yeah.
the audio. They have to do everything with regards to the podcast. And then after they record the podcast, they got to edit it. They got to promote it. They got to do everything. So absolutely, what you have there is a blessing,
Oh yeah.
to have all these people working with you. So you have a background in media,
Yeah.
basically. Now, would you say that your background or your experience working in media helped you in your podcast, and in what ways did it help you?
Oh, in so many ways. I would say that working in television in general, kind of, and studying it, all that sort of stuff, like my expectation for quality was at the top from day one.
Hmm.
So there was two sides to that. One side is that it made it harder because I didn't want to release anything that was subpar. And I always say to people, like, if you want to do something, just get it out the gate. Just hit record, just hit publish, just go for it first, because you'll have this idea circulating in your head for years and years and years and never release anything. So just release
Hmm.
it sometimes. And maybe it's not the best thing you can ever do, but just get started. And I think that, like, because of my expectation of it, everything being top notch out the gate, it could have prevented me from moving forward. Thankfully, though, because I had a team and because I do work in the media industry, I was like, hey, for podcasts, I know I'm going to need someone who can help me kind of like figure out who it's for. The first thing I always ask people when they start any sort of creative project is, who is it for? Like, why do we need this? Why is it important? Do we need another one? Are you the thing that makes it great? Like, asking all these kinds of questions. So knew I needed a teammate. And so, yeah, I've been in like kids TV and kind of being an actress and that sort of stuff for years. And so I just knew that, like, for me personally, I was going to need a team out the gate. And so those kinds of things were really helpful. I would also say that I learned that, shooting video content for years, even if the video is beautiful, but the audio is not good, it's not good. If
Hmm.
the audio is amazing and the video is bad, people will still watch it. People will still listen to it, because I just believe audio is the heart of it.
Yes.
So because I knew that, I was like, okay, team, we got to figure out like how we're going to do it. And for season one, we actually used Premiere to edit the audio because we were so used to it. And then we started doing add-ons throughout, like Premiere by Adobe Premiere, to use it. So we weren't actually using like a specific audio system to edit because we have such high expectation for audio within Premiere from day one anyways.
Yes.
So certain things like that, being that I work in media, I realized how important they were to me and how important they would be to make something quality.
Hmm.
And I know we did that. I know we've done that. And I'm really kind of proud of it too.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on what you mentioned, because so I mentioned to you before we started recording that I used to produce music. So, and I produce
Mhm.
podcasts right now. So when it comes to listening to podcasts, even if it's a good podcast and a topic that I want to listen to, if the audio quality is not good, I can't stand it. And I
Oh,
think
absolutely.
I think what you mentioned is absolutely important. So for all of the other podcasters out there who are just getting into the game, try your best to make sure that your audio quality is top notch. Do what you need to do in order to, remove the background noises, make sure that your room is a good setup. And if you don't have a good setup in your room, there's a lot of AI tools out there that
Yeah.
can help you to get that studio sound. And actually, I didn't mention this to you before, Meisha, but what I do is I have a cheat sheet for all of the podcasters for any. Yeah, it's amazing, trust me. And I'll
Ooh.
share a story in a second of how one of these apps helped me. But the cheat sheet has a list of all of these resources that can help podcasters. And I call it a cheat sheet because there are some resources that I found that are actually free, right? Or
We
they have a
love
free,
free.
yeah, or it has a free component to it, right? So you can actually use the product, use the software, get some results in your podcast and get good sound and audio. So here, story time with Chris. I was recording an episode for my other podcast, the Faith Fight podcast, and there was like a slight buzzing sound that I was hearing while I was doing the recording. I said to myself, okay, no big deal. It's very minor to me. The average person wouldn't even notice it. But then when I was doing the editing of that episode, it was actually louder than I thought. And it bothered me so much. And I was thinking to myself, oh, I got to re-record this thing again. But then I remembered one of the tools that I found that I put on this cheat sheet. And I just took my audio and I uploaded it to this program. It was a free program, by the way. And I run it through their AI processor and it cleaned up the audio so perfect. All of that background, the buzzing noise that was in the audio, completely gone. And I was just like, God, thank you that I found this app and it was free. So
oh wow, that's my
story of how
favorite price. I love it.
my favorite price too. I mean, I would open up my wallet to pay for anything for free, but it was free, so I didn't need to pay for anything. Anyways, so I say all that to say my cheat sheet, there's a link in the description. You can go and download the cheat sheet, anyone out there listening, and you can take a look at some of these apps. They will help you get good sounding audio, like Meisha just mentioned. And what I'm also going to do, Meisha, and we're going to transition a little bit to talk more about your podcast, like the specific episodes. But I'm going to put links for all of your podcasts and your social medias in the description so people can start to follow you, see some of this excellent content that you're creating. Because that's how I found you, actually. I found you through social media and Instagram, I think. And then I started listening to your podcast. And it's great. So I'm going to put links for all of your stuff in the description of this episode so people can check you out.
Thank you. New friends. We love that.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about your podcast now. So can you tell me about the best episode that you've ever done? So we're 2 years in. Can you now it might be hard because you got some episodes that you got to think back to, but what was the best episode that you can remember that you want to share? One of the best moments from your episode. So again, your episode is about Christian single life and it's for the ladies, right?
It's for the ladies.
It's for the ladies. And how do I know this? Because when you introduce everybody, instead of, normally you would say ladies and gentlemen, you say ladies and ladies. So that's completely awesome right there. So we know who it's for.
Yeah.
Can you share if there was like an amazing moment that happened in your podcast and let everybody know how wonderful that moment was for you?
Oh, thank you. Yeah. And you know what? I want to address that. We call it ladies and ladies because when we came up with the idea for the podcast, My Single Story, we said, you know what? Ultimately, our goal is to uplift single women of God. So often when we talk about singleness, it was things that were just like oversimplifying it, like how to get us out of the single space. Like, why don't you go on a dating app? Have you tried this? Have you tried that? I want to introduce you to so-and-so. And I was like, well, that's actually not what we're necessarily trying to do. We're not trying to get people out of singleness. There's tons of ways in which you can do that. But I believe God is the one who actually takes you out of singleness. So that's not what we're doing. Our goal is to uplift you while you're here. So I just wanted to make a podcast like that. And I knew that creating something for single women meant that we could create this kind of community. We love to meet up. We love to chat with each other. We're going to do more meetups probably as well. We just wanted to create a community. Now, dudes listen to it. And I appreciate that as well, because I've actually gotten a lot of guys who've reached out and said, thank you so much for listening, and who've reached out and said, like, I disagree with that, or I love that, or, oh my gosh, I can't believe I didn't think of that. And so that's exactly what we wanted as well. We want to be able to be available for everyone. I will always make it for single ladies, but single men, I mean, hello, welcome. We love it. So my favorite episode of the podcast personally, oh gosh, it's so hard to say favorite, but I will say one of the most impactful ones for me was in season 2 with Senite. I believe it's like the second to last episode in season 2. I forget the number, but she's a Christian psychotherapist, and we talked about therapy. And I thought it was so helpful because often with the singles podcast, it's all about dating, but we wanted to also address what it's like the 95% of the time where you're not on a date, you're just living as a single adult in the world. And we had this one question that hit my heart, and it was like, or I asked her, you need therapy, but you're a little afraid because when you go to therapy and you head home afterwards, you're going home to your empty condo. And there's this clear void where you would wish that there was a husband there to comfort you and to say, how did it go today? Or if you had an amazing breakthrough in therapy, you would love to be able to come home and say like, babe, like this is what I learned. And, this is how our relationship's going to be stronger, things like that. But when you come home as a single woman of God and you're an adult and you live alone, it can be really hard to, have effective therapy because of that. And so we talked about how a single woman could combat that and how therapy could still be helpful to her and how she shouldn't be afraid about giving therapy a shot, even when following it, she had to come home alone. And there were all these kinds of things. I think that really was special because the best thing for me about interviewing people, and I'm sure you've experienced the same, is I'm learning along with the listener, right?
Absolutely.
Everything that speaker says to me, I'm like, wow. And they get to experience it alongside me. And I learned a lot from her in that moment. So that's my favorite. But I always say to people, if they've never listened to the show yet, episode number 1 is my entire story.
Mm-hmm.
Listen to that. That is my single story. That's from the beginning. So that's what I recommend as a first listen.
Wonderful.
So
Yeah.
good.
So what you're doing with your podcast for single ladies, not to rush them out of that stage, but
Yeah.
so that they can be equipped and learn, so that when they get to the next stage, they're fully
Mhm.
equipped and they could manage and hold on to the blessing. So that singleness is absolutely necessary. And what I can hear from your episode that you shared, your favorite episode with the therapist, it's absolutely important. And that's something that I think some people, it's been becoming more common to hear people say that they're
Yes.
seeing a therapist nowadays, right?
Oh, for sure. For
From a
sure.
mental health perspective, it's becoming more acceptable
Yeah.
rather than it was back in the days, right?
Especially within the Christian community. Like I think often like there was this thing of like, oh, I just need to pray about it. And it's like,
Yes. Oh,
yeah, but
I've heard
then
that so many times.
you know what I mean? And I also wanted to touch just a little, obviously we're talking about singles now because that's the whole point of my podcast.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
I just wanted to say a bit about like the single season, in my opinion, is definitely an opportunity for you to be prepared for marriage. But I think in looking at it that way, it kind of takes the wind out of the sails in that season because not all of us will be married. And like, as
Right.
much as I believe that my God is good, and I actually pray as though I will already be, I pray believing that I will be married, and I believe that I will be married. I don't know for sure. I didn't
Mhm.
hear a promise from God. You didn't whisper in my ear. I don't know. But I do know that like, everyone needs to experience intimacy with God. That's what my desire is for them because it's changed my life so significantly. So my hope as well is that we don't make people feel like the single season is just prepare for marriage because,
Mhm.
we look at some of our friends who got married at 18 years old and we're like, well, you clearly didn't need that much preparation to get married, whatever. And so I just want to make it clear that right now there's such amazing things in it. And I think actually even in this season, we're going to be talking about like solo trips. And
Oh.
it's been one of the most beautiful things for my life has been like getting out there and traveling and meeting new people on trips, going
Mhm.
to new churches, going to cathedrals, all that sort of stuff. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this is something that if you're married, you might never get to experience because it would be strange for you to be like, bye, wife, I'm going on a trip by myself for fun. And you get to do that only when you're a single adult. So I was like, oh, I want to try doing more stuff that you might not get to do ever again once you're married because I'm in this season on purpose. So I just wanted to kind of mention that as well.
Yeah, and you're absolutely on point, right? But I want to make sure that everybody is listening, right?
Yeah.
So the points that you just made are so powerful. And this is the type of insight and wisdom that you can get when you listen to Misha's podcast. So I
Yeah.
would encourage everyone to subscribe and follow and listen to her podcast. Go back and listen to her story from the first episode and listen to the entire seasons. And she's going to continue doing her work with her podcast. So I want to encourage everyone to go on and listen. Again, links are in the description, so you can go down there,
Yeah.
click follow, subscribe, and follow Misha to get some more encouragement. If this is the type of content, if this is resonating with you, so
Mhm.
let's talk about how you promote your podcast now. So you mentioned before that you were working with a team, and there may be some changes
Yes.
going on for the next season. Do you want to share how promotion, maybe how it worked or how you did it in the past, and how you
Mhm.
plan to do it in the future with regards to how you promote your new episodes and things that you use?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that if you look at any movies right now, they probably put 50% of their budget into making the movie and 50% into marketing it. It's
Interesting.
incredibly important to
Mhm.
put time, strategy behind how you're going to promote the podcast because it's great to create it, but if no one's listening, then what are you doing? So you're just speaking into the ether. And we don't want that. So we put a lot into marketing, and I'm not talking about funds, I'm talking about manpower, women power, I should say, into getting the podcast out there. the way that we do it, yes, we do boost our podcast on socials. Socials is probably, we get probably more traction on Instagram than we do even on the platform itself, like Spotify and Apple and that sort of stuff, which in the beginning we were like, oh no, we want more download numbers. And then we realized that we were getting 50,000 accounts engaging with our social media all the time. And we were like, wait, like that thing has 60,000 views. That thing has so many likes. People are really seeing us on Instagram. They love the short form content.
Yeah.
So we're like, okay, let's keep on boosting through social media. So that's one way that we do it. Another way we do it is we actually go to conferences. So over the last year, we've gone to 2 conferences. We put up booths and we promote our podcast. We do contests at the booth itself where we give away little things like, little goodie bags with like candy and scrunchies and that sort of stuff. And we have our giant QR code where we say like, follow us now sort of thing. So that the actual booth itself costs probably about $200 and a day of promoting. And we meet so many people who are looking for this kind of thing. That's one way. The second way is I myself as a content creator, but as a host, I host singles events. So I myself don't host the event. I don't have to, not host it, sorry. I don't put on the event, but I become the host. So when I go to those events and they say like, this is Meisha Watson, the host of My Single Story, people are like, what is that? And then they go follow me. So it's also
Right.
about getting out there on the road and making it happen. One thing I learned from the first television show I did back in the day was it was great to just put it on YouTube and make it happen. But if you don't have those kind of ad dollars, getting your face out there is imperative. Going to all the networking events, all the meetups, when someone says to you like, hey, we love your stuff. I'm like, great, let's hang out. Like, I just realized that getting out there and getting from behind the camera was so important. It's grown our podcast, yes, but it's also helped the people who are already listening to engage with it more. So yeah, that's how we did it.
Wonderful, wonderful. That's so much.
Yeah, it
But
is.
I see one thing that I can see that you did is that you and your team were very intentional
Mhm.
in the strategies that you took, as well as you were able to identify when you needed to pivot and change course. Like if you saw
Yes.
more traction on Instagram, let's put more of our effort towards Instagram versus, on one of the other methods of promoting your podcast. So that's one of the things that I think is really important. That when you, as a podcaster, when you see any changes in or any momentum being gained on any particular social media app, that you kind of lean into it
Yeah.
and try to get as much traction as you can out of it, right? And get as much engagement. I think that's the word that you use.
Yeah.
Engagement, right? As you can out of it, right? So that's
Mhm.
a really good insight that you shared there. And I hope all the other podcasters out there who are struggling to try to find new listeners or engagement, that they take note of that and just go and take a look at some of their analytics and see what the numbers are telling them, right? See where
Yeah,
most of your people are, where most of your people are.
absolutely. I think even I wanted to say that I think
Mhm.
when we got started, everyone said, well, what about TikTok? Like, why aren't you guys on TikTok? And at the time, our demographic, which we would say probably is about 29 to late 30s for the most part, women in urban areas of Ontario, we were like, they're actually one of the number one leading people who were joining TikTok at the time. So we were like, oh, we should definitely be on TikTok. But then I wasn't really on TikTok as a content creator. I was on it more as a viewer. So I was like, okay, I'm going to have to learn a new platform myself out the gate and get it started. And I was like, Meisha, like, go to your Instagram and check your insights there first. When I went to Instagram, I was like, we're doing great. We're doing great on Instagram. Why don't we double down here first, see how it goes, build it up. And then once we built it up there, we can transfer all of our viewers over to our TikTok or to Facebook or whatever. Build it up first in the place that you're most comfortable, you're most confident, and people will follow. I want to make a point that a while ago in the US, there was like a worry that it might still be the case. I don't know, that TikTok was going to go away. And I'd be listening to TikTokers being like, hey, don't forget to follow me on YouTube just in case TikTok goes away. Of course they did. Why? Because they grew this huge number of followers, listeners, people who engage with their content on TikTok. And if TikTok went away, it'd be like zilch, gone. And you're not getting email lists from TikTok, okay? People are not joining your email list of TikTok. Maybe they are, but not that I've seen. So you wouldn't be able to let them know what you're up to, what you're doing next. And for some people, TikTok is their form of income. So they were like, what am I going to do? So same thing with us. We were like, people are on Instagram, they're loving it there. Let's continue growing that. If we're putting any money behind boosting ads, we're going to definitely do it on Instagram. And the hope is in the next like year or so, we will transfer to, now that I've learned a bit more about so many different social platforms, then we'll start to branch out from there. But our home base will probably always be Instagram.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing insight. You need to teach a course on like social media stuff or something like that, because I would definitely sign up for that to learn a little bit more from you. And I was gonna ask you actually, that was my follow-up question, like the other social media platforms and if you're on
Mm-hmm.
them, like so do you have like a Facebook group or a page that where your content lives, or where there's a group of individuals where they connect, or is it just Instagram that you're on right now? Or
Well,
YouTube?
I'm glad you asked
Okay.
because we do connect a lot on Instagram. We talk in the chat and the DMs and that sort of thing. And a lot of single women sliding into my DM. Not single men, unfortunately, no one's sliding in there, but single women are like, let's be friends. But we do have a Facebook page. It is right now, it exists, but we haven't promoted it as much. The goal is, well, what we were trying to figure out, to be honest, was what was it for?
Mm,
I don't just want to have another account. So I was like, what is it for? And I think what we've decided over these last 2 years is it's not about just showing you our new episode. It's going to be a place where we can promote our meetups. We were like, we want to actually connect with people. We realize that Facebook is really set up well for groups. We can promote through there, yes, but I don't know, in my demo, people are really spending tons of time on Facebook. They're spending hours on Instagram and hours on TikTok, but Facebook was more of a popover thing. So we were like, okay, maybe that's the place we go for groups. We've noticed a lot of single Christian groups on Facebook where they amass huge numbers because why? They're like, ooh, I want to see which other single girls, or if there are single guys joining the group, where we can go and meet each other. And I think Facebook's really great for that. So we'll be adding that probably in the next couple of weeks within the fall. And then TikTok will they'll definitely be adding. And this is going to sound super weird. LinkedIn. We're going to be
yeah, you're
going
gonna have
through
to explain that.
LinkedIn because although LinkedIn is certainly where you go to find a new job and make yourself super
Right.
marketable, we were like, but they're there too. And
Okay.
actually, LinkedIn, I understand way more than I understood some like Facebook and that. I'm still learning how to do like an effective group on Facebook. Like, you always have like those random groups from high school or whatever. But LinkedIn, I already know how to market on there. And I
Mm,
realized that I have 1,900 connections on there. And it's so easy to keep adding connections. I was like, oh my gosh, I can just keep adding and adding and accepting and accepting. And it's not about people necessarily following me because LinkedIn is going to send that content out for me. I was like, oh
mhm.
my gosh, let's go. So that's the next kind of like phase is using LinkedIn probably as much, if not more, than what we're already doing on Instagram.
Wow, wow. My mind, like if I had hair on my head, it would be standing up like this because like my mind is just like the gears are just spinning. I'm like,
Right.
wow, wow. So so I'm thinking about one of the things that you said is if you have a Facebook group, what are you going to use it for? Not just don't
Yeah.
just use it just to promote your episodes. And I'm thinking to myself, so I have a Facebook page
Mhm.
for this podcast. And I'm struggling, like I'm thinking, okay, maybe I'll share my episodes there, but I'm sharing them on Instagram right now, and that's working. I'm getting a lot of traction on
Yeah.
Instagram and on YouTube. I recently started doing that as well. But like, what am I going to use my Facebook page for? That's what I'm thinking about now, right? I've been struggling with it before, right?
Mhm.
But now I need to put some serious thought into how to best utilize my Facebook page.
Yeah.
And then the insight that you mentioned on LinkedIn, like I've never thought about it from that perspective as well, right?
Yeah.
Uh, but again, and I wouldn't have thought about it, for yourself, for your podcast. I would think, okay, why would you want to put or promote your podcast on LinkedIn? The way that you explained it though makes absolute perfect sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And just to kind of like punctuate that more, every social media platform does different things very well. For
Hmm.
a long time, Instagram was just about having the most slick photography.
Photography, right?
And then it became video based, right? Then
Mhm.
TikTok comes in and it's about authenticity. Now, that doesn't mean you should take the same content you have on Instagram, post it on TikTok, and be like, great. Why? Because TikTok prefers a less edited version of your content. And I mean, when I say less edited, they still want some kind of edit, but
Mhm.
it's different. So same with LinkedIn. I'm not going to go on LinkedIn and be like, watch the episode. I'm going on LinkedIn and saying, hey, when we post this episode, these are the analytics that we got. And we learn that, for instance, we're obviously within the church community. So we'll say like, a new singles ministry is popping up in Canada. This is what they're up to. Here are the statistics as to why this is important. So does take a little bit more work to version out your content for different platforms, but you kind of got to play the DJ game in different places to make sure that your content is reaching the right kinds of people in different buckets of social media.
Oh my goodness. Like I said, you should be teaching a course on it. That is amazing insight. Amazing insight. Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. And I hear all of the insights that you're sharing. So I want to encourage everyone to do some deep research and understand where is the best place that you should share your content for your podcast, right? And when you find that place, do your best and then continue to learn as these social media apps change. Oh, Meisha, this has been great so far. And you mentioned something earlier that you interviewed people to learn for yourself.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, selfishly for myself as well. I want to learn a lot about podcasting, and I'm learning a lot from you right now.
I'm
And the good
glad.
thing about this, like for me at least, selfishly, I get to implement some of these things before this episode is released because I'm talking to you right now today, and it's going to be released sometime in the future. So,
Right, exactly.
so I get to implement these things before it's released. But thank you so much. This has been great so far. Let's talk about some of the hardware and software tools that you use
Okay.
to produce your podcast. Now, I know you said you had a team, so you may not have insight of some of the tools that they were using, but to the best of your knowledge, what types of equipment, software, hardware go into producing your podcast?
Yeah. So as I said, we're doing quite a big shift. When this episode airs, I will be producing the thing from start to finish myself.
Mhm.
And yes, I'll have a little help with my team, but I'm basically taking it on my own shoulders to make it happen. And so I'll probably be shifting some of these products and equipment pieces and gear and that in the future. But right now we have a blessed setup. We currently use, I think it's called an ATEM something or other. It's like on a Mac. And we use Blackmagic cameras. I know that much to shoot the content, which is amazing because I'm shooting in 6K. So we're able to push in and it makes the content beautiful. We also have Shure mics, so Shure. We have 4 mics in the room that we use. We do our editing in Premiere, but we also do cleaning up with, I don't remember what it's called. Oh my gosh, I forgot. Yeah, that's all I know about the gear. Oh, and we use Riverside. That's like, I think it's now called Riverside Spotify for podcasters. I think they're
Yeah,
like
there's some connections going on with
connection there.
Spotify. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So that's kind of what we use to push it out. And we shoot in our studio at Crossroads Media and partly at home as well.
Yeah, wow. Absolutely awesome. Yeah, a lot of the tools that you mentioned, so the Shure mic, that's one of the ones that a lot of podcasters do get. I know it's a little bit on the expensive side,
Mhm.
but if you can afford the Shure mic, it will make you sound like a radio broadcaster. It is absolutely amazing. But I do want to caution everybody because one of the things that I hear from a lot of podcasters is they get hung up on the gear that they need to get, and they sometimes spend more money than they need to when they don't necessarily have all of the passion to pursue it over the long haul, right?
Yes.
Because podcasting is a long game. You don't want, if you just do 3 or 4 episodes and you get tired of it, or if you burn out, have too much work to do, then you're just going to have a lot of equipment to be used as paperweights in your home office type of thing, right?
Yes. Oh
And you
my
don't want that.
gosh.
You don't want that. Expensive
No.
paperweights. You don't want that.
I have a story on that. A good
Yeah,
friend
yeah,
of
go ahead.
mine
Story time.
was like, oh, I want to do TV. And then reached out to me and I was like, all these questions about production. Now, as I said, I did television for the last 12 years. So I love cameras. I love lighting. I love, scripting, content, all that kind of stuff. So I just kind of like downloaded everything into him and said, like, here's all the stuff we use, whatever. Now, at the time, I was working for a different secular television station where they had huge budget. And at the time, red cameras were new.
Mhm.
Now that's probably like $100,000 camera at the time when we were talking about it. And I said to him, that's what we used. Did he not go out and
Oh.
buy a red camera? I don't know how he did it because I still don't know how you just get that kind of money because I didn't know he was rolling in it like that. But He bought a Red camera and he probably made content for like a couple months. It's still just collecting dust in his garage.
Oh no.
And I keep saying like, you know what, just sell it. Just sell it. He's like, no, I'm going to do it. And I'm like, look, just get started first with whatever you've got. Here, case in point, I've been doing podcasting for 2 years with an entire team. I'm now moving out on my own and doing it. I went from a Shure mic to a Yeti mic I got off of Amazon. I went from a 6K Blackmagic to that iPhone that's right behind me. I got a brand new iPhone 15. I was like, we're going to start using that as my camera. I got my own laptop and I got a hard drive off of Amazon. And that's what we're going to shoot with for a little while until I can figure out how things move forward. And if I need to hire a producer, et cetera, et cetera. My main thing is, as I said, audio got to be good, content got to be good, and it got to make sure that the audience is getting exactly what they are desiring. I know we can do those things. Spending $100 on Amazon, we're going to go ahead and do that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Those three things that you mentioned right there are things that I think if people listen got nothing from this episode, I hope that they got those three things that you just mentioned. But I'm sure people got a lot of insight from what you said. So, man, $100,000 camera, and he bought it, and now it's just sitting in his garage. Ugh.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I hope he gets the motivation to get back into it. That's all.
Or he can just give it to me. Like I can make it work.
Exactly.
Like,
you know what? Yeah, you've been blessed so far. Maybe he might just wake up one morning and be like, you know what? Meisha needs this camera. She's been such a help. Let me just give it to her.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Awesome. So we're about to wrap up. I usually ask this question to wrap up every interview because, you know, I'm human. Sometimes I forget things. But is there anything that you want to share that would be like a final insight or wisdom that you want to share to anyone, either about your podcast or about podcasting in general, that you feel that they need to hear?
Yes, I love content, period. Any version of content that is, you know, created because of someone's passion, I just love to take it in. And so I'm a fan of content. And I realized that a lot of people create content based on what they already love, and they create it and try to emulate it. I don't think that's necessary. If you want to make a podcast that's very different from what you've ever seen, amazing, go for it. The first season of our podcast, we added a lot of story times in the middle, where we would actually do almost like a fairy tale story of a really embarrassing moment that I had in my singleness. And as I'm sharing that story, I'm a little bit uncomfortable because I'm like, people don't really do this kind of thing. And it sounds a bit like an audiobook / podcast, but let's see how it goes. That's one of the first, or the biggest compliments we got from people was, it's so different. It sounds like a story. And I was like, well, it's my single story. So that's great. And people listening to that on their way to work in the morning, it was like they got to listen to this beautiful story on the way to work, giggle a little bit, and get started at the office. I've heard people have ideas about starting like a morning show podcast where everyone listens to it on their way to work. I was like, go for it. If you have a passion and you want to talk about that thing and you want to do it a little bit different from what you've ever seen, who cares? Go for it. And that's my biggest encouragement to people. Just get started. That's
it. Absolutely. Get started and then be yourself. Don't try to be anybody else. Just be yourself. And you'll find that when you be authentic and you are yourself, that people will gravitate to what you're doing. And because you're not being fake, you will have a little bit more longevity because you don't need to put on a front or try to be someone else. You could be yourself and just let it flow. And you'll see the authenticity will just come out, and you see people will love it. Will love it.
That's it right there.
Meisha, this has been a wonderful, wonderful episode. Thank you so much for being on I Made a Podcast. Again, everybody, her podcast is called My Single Story, and you can get it on all the podcasting apps. Follow Meisha on social media. You heard her insight that she was sharing about social media. So, and again, I'm going to make it easy. I'm going to put all of your links for everything in the description of this episode so people can go there. Just go in the description, everybody, and you can connect with Meisha. So, Meisha, thank you so much for being on I Made a Podcast. This was a blast. It was an amazing conversation with you, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Chris. Bye.
All right, everybody, that was it for another episode of I Made a Podcast. And I told you were going to learn a lot through this episode with Meisha. I hope that you were able to write down some notes and listen to some of the things that she said and apply it into your podcast. She dropped so much insight on us about social media and how to use the different social media apps to promote your podcast and what you want to use it for. I was totally blown away. So there's a lot of insight in this episode that you can use for your podcast. Now, if you want to connect with Meisha, her social media links and her podcast links are all in the description. So you can go and listen to her podcast if it resonates with you, and you can follow her on social media. And trust me, you're not going to be disappointed. She's such a wonderful person, wonderful episode that I had with her. So follow her on social media. Links are in the description of this episode. I also put links for my cheat sheet in the description of this episode so you can start your podcast. And as I always say, the best time to start a podcast was 10 years ago. The second best time is right now. So go ahead and make it happen. And I'm here to help you. So you'll hear from me again next week on I Made a Podcast. Peace.